This is Minister in the Making, a podcast for church people, from the ones who stand in the pulpit every Sunday to the ones who only show up at Christmas and Easter. The mission of this podcast is to give church people a behind-the-scenes, inside look at life in Christian ministry. I'm your host, B.T. Irwin, and your guide is my dad, Travis Irwin, who shares the stories and wisdom he collected from 50 years in full-time church work. Now, take it from me, growing up in a minister's family, I know something that people who never lived in a minister's household don't know. That is what it's like for the phone to ring 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and for those calls to come from people caught in crises. I'm talking about everything from a death in the family, to getting picked up for drunk driving, to a marriage on the rocks, to just being lonely and needing to talk to someone. When Dad started in ministry in 1975, he and Mom could not foresee how helping people in crisis would become a normal part of their everyday lives. Almost from the get-go, they had to get used to daily calls for help. As long as they worked with small congregations, they found they could handle it. But by the mid-1990s, Dad was ministering to the Steel Avenue Church of Christ in Ashland, Ohio. That congregation was growing so much that the elders decided to build a whole new campus to meet the need for space. As the congregation grew, so did the responsibility that Dad took on himself to be there for people who needed help. And the more Dad helped people in crisis, the more people in crisis seemed to find Dad. Even though he refused to admit it at the time, the strain was becoming too much. Things finally got out of control when Dad got so entangled with one member of the church that it put Dad, our family, and the entire congregation in danger. This is episode number 27, I Had a Messiah Complex. Okay, so today we have Dad and we have Mom, and I wanted Mom to join us for this conversation, and I think you'll understand why as we get into it. But I'm going to start with a story. I was the youth ministry intern at the Southside Church of Christ in Grenada, Mississippi for 2 summers when I was in college. And my first week of my first summer on the job there, we got a call from Mrs. Lowry, and Mrs. Lowry was starving to death and needed food. And what I learned is that Mrs. Lowry called the Southside Church of Christ every week. Because every week it was the same story. I mean, it was the exact same story. She'd been kicked out of her home. Her car broke down. She didn't have any food. And Mrs. Lowry didn't even really try. After a while, she just told the same story, and we'd tell her no. And then she'd call back 2 days later and try the same story again. And I found out from the minister there that she went to all the churches around town asking for food. But that was an eye-opener for me, because when I went there that summer, I thought I was going there to do ministry to the teenagers at the church. And, so I was thinking about Bible classes and youth retreats and youth activities and, teaching these teenagers how to pray and study their Bibles, doing some service projects. And then I found out about Mrs. Lowry, and she's just one example of the people that would contact the church on a regular basis, asking for help. Some of them really needed it. Some of them didn't. And all of those calls went to the minister, Bobby Valentine at the time. And so Bobby took all those calls from people that needed help. And so I just never really thought about that before. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, because Mom and Dad, when you were in Nashville, as Dad was finishing up college, and Dad, you'd made the choice to go into church education, and you were starting to look for jobs in Texas and Tennessee, and then eventually in Ohio. Did you ever foresee that taking these kinds of phone calls and meeting people like Mrs. Lowry and helping people was going to be not only a part of your job, but a part of your life for the next
Never.
50 years?
Never. I wasn't prepared for that at all. No, I wasn't surprised when it happened, but I wasn't prepared for it, especially on the level that it came.
So tell me the story, if you can remember, what is the first time that you can recall when you were at the West Side Church of Christ in Akron, Ohio, the first time that you can recall taking one of these phone calls or having somebody come up to you and ask for help?
There were several people that came by. There was a guy, a man and a wife that came by in their car, and they were pulling an old beat up Volkswagen behind them, and they had their children in the Volkswagen behind them. They were gypsies, they were travelers, and they were asking for money, and we made the mistake of giving them money. The other one I like about Akron is the one of a guy named Charlie. And Charlie was single and he was homeless, supposedly. And he called, one year he called, and he was in a store up at Summit Mall. And if you know anything about Montrose and that area, it's a very ritzy area. But he was in the mall up there, and he wanted a place to stay that night. And the police were there with him, and they were helping him make the phone call. And he wanted to. I said, "Well, Charlie, I'll come get you, and I'll take you downtown. There's a nice a place I can put you there, Salvation Army." He says, "No, I want to stay someplace else." I said, "Where do you want to stay?" He says, "Well, I want to stay across the street at the Hilton." I said, "No, that's not how we operate." I said, "But I'll take you downtown." No, thanks anyway. I said, "We'll put the policeman back on the phone." So he put the policeman back on the phone, and I explained it. And that was into that until about a year or two later. Charlie called again. This time he was over in Cuyahoga Falls, and he wanted something. And I said, "Charlie, I know who you are. You and I've talked before." "No, you don't know who I am." I said, "No, Charlie, I know who you are." I recognized his voice, recognized his story, recognized his name, the whole 9 yards. And basically, just to be honest with you, I was a little angry. And I said, "Well, we're done." I said, "I'll come over there and buy you some breakfast and we'll talk." No, I don't want to do that. So anyway, that's my first, those two were my first introductions to people in need, quote, end quote.
Yeah. Wasn't there a person, this is from a previous episode, wasn't there a person that you had to drive in like a blizzard or something to?
Yeah.
She was a member.
Well, she was a member of the congregation.
That counts too.
Yeah. She was a legit person.
Right.
A hardworking lady, worked at the public library on the Circle up in Cleveland. Very sweet lady, good lady, 2 wonderful children. And her car had gotten stolen for the 3rd time, and she wanted to go up and retrieve it. I think she wanted to retrieve it on the worst weather day of north central Ohio. It was snowing, it was horrible. And she called me, and so I just dropped everything on Monday morning, and I was driving a new Malibu station wagon. You remember that car? And went and got her. And you if anybody wants to refer back and listen to all those details, they're welcome to do it. But one thing, this is before cell phones, and we finally found the car. It took all day. It was dark when we got back that night, and we did get the car, got towed back because she couldn't start it because they'd busted up the steering column. But and then there were things like that all along the way. People who were members and people who weren't members. The most trying ones are where people come into the parking lot, they won't help, and they have a baptismal certificate from the Church of Christ. And what you learn later on is they have a whole stack of them from different churches.
Well, I didn't mean to make it seem like this conversation is about con artists. Really, the conversation is the conversation really is about how often, as a professional minister, as a pastor, as someone in that role in a church, you take calls and visits from people that need help. Sometimes it really is legitimate, and sometimes it's not. You said a minute ago that nothing prepared you for the level at which it came. What do you mean by the level at which it came at you?
Well, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. Sometimes it was the level of help they needed. Sometimes it was the time involved to get help. I didn't know what the policy was. I didn't know what the church's policy was. In fact, I heard a few years ago that Westside doesn't help anybody at all anymore. I don't know if that's true or not. Some churches just have a policy, we don't help nobody, no way. And except members of the church. Well, that's their decision. I don't know if that's true of Westside. I don't know if it's true to begin with or if it's true today. But the level is just the time consumed, the amount in the request, and just the number of people. Sometimes you could go a week without having anybody. Sometimes you'll have people 2 or 3 in a day, and they'll come in your building and they'll sit down until you help them. They will not leave until you help them. That's a very subtle way of saying, I'm not leaving until you give me something.
Yeah.
And then some people get ugly. You're a church, you're supposed to help me.
That's what I was going to say. It really hurts when people say, well, I thought you were a Christian.
Yeah.
Christians are supposed to help. That really hurts.
They pour on the guilt. And sometimes they ask for some pretty bizarre things too. So that I was not prepared for that, but I learned very, very quickly. And we had there's always someone in each congregation that pretty much picks up the slack and takes care of it. You have to call them, you have to wait for them. Some churches have a policy where they have to meet, 3 days later and then make a decision. But anyway, I'm rambling now, but there's all kind of things we could talk about.
Well, you brought up that you heard that the West Side Church of Christ doesn't help people anymore. I know at the South Side Church of Christ in Grenada, the policy that the church created there was that they gave there was a community food pantry that all the churches contributed to.
Yeah.
So anytime someone called and they needed food, we would just refer them to that central food pantry that all the churches were involved with.
Right.
And if people needed money, this was the 90s. So I don't think we had gift cards. I think we had small envelopes of cash at the police station.
Okay.
So they could go get some an envelope of cash for gas or food or whatever, but they had to go to the police station and get it. So we had ways of helping people outside the church. But inside the church, that within a congregation itself, you're always going to help your own members, right?
Right. Absolutely.
And within any congregation, even a small congregation, you've got people who get sick, you've got people who die, you've got people who are, dealing with cancer. You've got people who lose their jobs or their house burns down or their car breaks down. I mean, just taking care of your own is a big thing. And a lot of those needs, I would guess, do filter through the minister. I mean, would you agree?
In some places, yes. In larger places, no. Most members of the church are aware of who's in charge of that, and they'll go to that person or that committee. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes members don't know who to go to, so they go to the minister. He knows everybody. He's supposed to know everything. So
and then sometimes the minister finds out about a need, and then can go to whoever, the deacon or the committee or the elders or whoever, and say, "Hey, I found out that this member has this need." That the minister does seem to have his finger on the pulse of what's happening with the members, and he knows when they're going to need something.
So, Mom, when you were first getting into this with Dad, and you were in West Side, I mean, he just told these stories about, Charlie and the folks that, had their kids in the Volkswagen, and the woman that he took up to Cleveland all day long. And I remember that story. He didn't know where he was. And he had no way to contact you. As the minister's wife, how did all of this hit you? I mean, what is your perspective on, as Dad got into his ministry with a congregation, what effect did it take on you that he was helping all of these people, both in and outside of the church?
Well, I was surprised. It was, just like he said, it wasn't anything that I expected. I never really, when I was growing up, my family never really needed anything from the church, and I never really thought about the church helping members or anything. And so I was surprised by it. Sometimes, well, in the case where he took the lady up to Cleveland, I knew he told me he was taking her.
Mhm.
And I think my first reaction was, the weather's horrible. The roads are terrible. Do you have to do this today? And then when he was gone for 12 hours or longer, and
Wow.
there were no cell phones, then I was really getting worried that something had happened to them. But there was nothing I could do but just sit and pray. And he
Wow.
finally came home. It does take a lot of time away from the family. And as you kids were born and we tried to have family time, I was very resentful a lot of times about the time that it took away from our family.
Mm.
I look at it different. I was I lost some family time, but also I lost my work time. Anytime a preacher's interrupted, whatever time it takes to take care of that emergency or urgent situation, he has to make that up someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think, well, he's got plenty of time. Well, yes and no, but I may have to work I lost Monday, so that means I had to work 7 days that week instead of 6.
Mm-hmm.
Get caught up. I lost 8 to 12 hours of time. Sermon prep, lesson prep, visitation, phone calls, and other things. So we lost family time, but I also lost work time. I had to catch up, and I had to perform as well as possible. Otherwise, I'll lose my job.
So what I assume your job description at each place where you worked up through Ashland, I assume your job description mainly focused on evangelism, right? So preaching, teaching, Bible study, evangelism. And you were passionate about that, and you did it very well. I guess that your job description at Westside and Cadiz and Ashland didn't say anything about, helping people with groceries, helping people with bills and rent, taking folks to taking folks to pick up their car from the impound lot. I assume that stuff was not in your job description, right?
Nope.
But you did it.
Never there. Yeah.
And knowing you the way that I do, Dad, I'd say you did it mainly because you love people and you care about people. That
Sure.
seems to be what motivates you the most in life. And because that's the example that Jesus gave us. When
Yeah.
people came to Jesus and they needed help, he gave them what he had.
Yeah.
But what percent of as the years went by, so Westside was a smaller church, Cadiz was a smaller church. When you went to Steel Avenue Church of Christ, it was a smaller church, but Steel Avenue Church of Christ grew over the 20-something years that you were there. So that's more members and their families and their friends and their neighbors to look out for. What percent of your time and energy as the minister did you spend on helping people? And again, I'm not talking about Bible studies and evangelism work. I'm talking about calls in the middle of the night to go to the emergency room, counseling marriages that were in trouble, helping somebody find groceries, giving someone a ride, changing a flat tire. What percent of your energy or time do you think eventually went to those activities?
I would say definitely 10%, but probably more, probably 25, 30.
Yeah.
It's called sometimes it's called pastoral.
Mm-hmm.
And before you know it, as a preacher, you are doing more of that than you realize.
Mm-hmm.
You're running all over the place. You're seeing people in the hospital, and you are getting up at 3 a.m. and going to ER, and somebody comes by the building and that's a couple having a fight, or the man comes back because he just had a fight with his wife, and just an hour here, 2 hours there, 3 hours here, over here, 5 hours over here, and before you know it, you're behind and having difficulty getting caught up. But that happened a lot more as time went along, and I think that's what contributed to my burnout. I can blame it on those. I'm not blaming it on those people. I'm blaming it on me, but it did contribute in some way. I was overtaxed, and I really wasn't doing anything to help myself during that time either. But that's another discussion for another time.
Well, it's there was a mom already brought up kind of the bleed over into family life.
Yeah.
I have some memories. One is that this is before cell phones and caller ID, and we had a phone in the dining room right next to the table where we ate our meals, and we had a joke in our house, that it went something like somebody knows we just sat down to eat because they're calling now. We would sit down to eat, and no sooner did we start the prayer than the phone would ring.
Yeah.
And I remember, Mom, you getting irritated and saying to Dad, just let it ring, right?
Mhm.
If it's important, they'll call back. And
That's right.
in a precursor to this day and age where everybody's constantly looking at their cell phones and they just can't put them down, Dad couldn't help himself. He had to go answer the phone. So we got calls. I got used to us getting calls all the time from people, and they weren't calling to have Bible studies. They were calling because they were in a crisis of some kind, and Dad was the one that they thought of. There's another time, I think we brought this up before. It was really weird for me because I was pretty young, but there was a time that a woman dropped her kids at our front door, like a total stranger. Like I think she just found us in the phone book or something, and figured Dad was a minister at a church, and she literally left her kids at our house.
I can't remember her name. I remember it.
Yeah, tell us, remind me, refresh that story for me.
I think she actually had visited the church. I don't even know if she was a single mother or not, but she had 3 little kids, and she just needed a break from her kids and had nobody. And so, I think she came to church on Sunday, and I think that afternoon she showed up at our house and just said, I need somebody to watch my kids. And so I said, okay, not thinking that it was going to be like overnight, a couple of days. And so she left. I had no way to get in touch with her. And after they were there all night, the next day I got to thinking, what if this woman never comes back for these kids? But she did. She was gone about 24 hours, and she came back and got her kids, and we never saw her again. I have no idea. I can't even remember what her name was or the kids' names or anything. But, when she asked, I just thought she meant like a couple of hours.
Yeah.
And it ended up being about 24 hours.
Yeah, that was weird. I remember that.
It was
'cause
weird.
these 3 kids that I didn't know just appeared in our house.
No, it was at Ashland. It was on Heltman.
Yeah, it was on Heltman. Yeah. And
Really? Okay.
they were there all day Sunday, and we had to take them to church with us on Sunday night, obviously, because
Wow.
we went to church, and then there was a little baby. I mean, one of the kids was
They were
was an
all
infant.
little.
Yeah. I ended up sleeping on the living room floor on my sleeping bag that Sunday night because at least one of the kids was in my bedroom. And none of that made any sense to me. I couldn't figure out who these kids were, why they were at our house, what I was doing on the living room floor. I remember I think Dad was in the living room with me. Maybe you had the infant with you, Mom, in your bedroom, but I remember laying on my sleeping bag in the living room floor, and Dad was in there too. And it was late at night, and we were watching Dallas, which is the only time I ever watched Dallas.
Oh my word!
Because I think Dad was just trying to, take his mind off things. But I mean, how often did Dad's role as the minister of a church, and the people that were looking to Dad for help, how often did that affect our family life? Go into a little more detail about that, Mom.
Well, it ended up affecting it quite a bit. And I know that it took me a few years to, I'm not going to say adjust, because I don't know that I ever really adjusted to it, but to make up my mind that I was not going to. I felt like I missed out on a lot of things, because we would have plans to do things as a family, and then somebody would call and your dad would go, and you and Michelle and Bethy and I would end up staying home and not doing whatever this thing was that we had planned to do as a family. And after a few years, I decided I wasn't going to do that anymore. That if he felt like he had to go, then I was going to take you kids and we were going to do whatever that fun thing was anyway. And I can remember one year, you guys always got Monday off during the Ashland County Fair. It was always fair day at school. So and that was family day or kids day or something at the fair. And your dad had agreed we were all going to go to the fair together as a family. And lo and behold, that morning before we got ready to leave, somebody called and had some emergency. And your dad has the most compassionate heart of anybody I know. And he just felt like he had to go help them. I was really angry. But he went, and I just said to you kids, well, we're going to the fair. And you were all like, aren't we going to wait for Dad? And I said, no, we're not waiting for Dad. And so I took all three of you and we went to the fair all day. And I said, he knows where we are if he wants to come, but I don't think he ever showed up, So it was hard for me to understand why all these other people came before us. I really struggled with that a lot. So it did interfere. It interfered with the actual doing, but it also interfered with my emotions.
And I assume that caused some tension in your marriage. I mean, obviously there was some tension in that instance, but over time.
I mean, I don't know how many times I said to your dad, and I paraphrased a scripture, but I said, what is it worth if you gain the souls of the whole world and lose the souls of your children? I said, these are your kids. You got to have some part in this, He was very good about making sure that he, if at all possible, he went to anything that had to do with your schooling, parent teacher conferences. If you guys did some kind of a program, he was very good about making sure that he was at those things. But if it just seemed like if it was something that we planned as a family, it got interfered with a lot. And that's why I insisted on us doing a family night every week. If you remember, Tuesday night was family night.
Yep.
And boy, you talk about disagreements. We really butted heads on that, because your dad was like, that's one of my nights that I can do Bible studies. I need to make visits. And I was like, no, you need to visit with your kids. You need to give us one night a week. And so it was Tuesday night. And that's why I started it, so that he would do something with us.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to paint him as a bad person, because he definitely is not. But we did butt heads. It's
kind of interesting, Brad, even on Tuesday nights, even though I set those nights aside to be home, it always happened. It didn't always happen, but it happened a lot where someone would die.
Yeah.
And their calling hours would be Tuesday night.
Yeah.
And I told your mom, I said, Deb, I need 30 minutes. I'm running over to Highall Funeral Home, or whatever funeral home it was there in Athens or Ashland, and I'll be right back. And I went in, and for lack of a better way of saying it, I made an appearance, and I was sincere. I wanted to be there, and told the family I loved them, and I would talk to them about the funeral and what we were going to do. And I just moved on out, came back home, had to take off my suit and tie and put on jeans and a t-shirt, and we had family night. And that sometimes that caused a little issue, because calling hours were later, like 7 o'clock. that started cutting into family time that night. But we got it worked out, and your mom learned a lot and kind of gave a little bit, and I learned a little bit, and I gave a little bit. I don't know, and she did not want you children to suffer, and I don't think we caused you to suffer. There was a time when there was some suffering involved, and we may discuss that. But anyway, we really tried to protect you kids and let you kids know that you were valuable and you were important to us.
There will be an entire episode where we talk about that in detail, marriage and family. For the record, I'll say, as a kid, as your kid, I never felt like I got the short end of the stick in terms of your time. I feel like as a dad, you made us more of a priority than a lot of other dads made their kids. I tell stories to Tracy all the time about, how you took us to breakfast every Saturday morning, and family night. I didn't see the conflict between the two of you that went into family night. I just knew that we had family night, right? And I probably complained about it at the time, to be honest with you, but now I look back on it as one of my favorite memories. So I always felt like you prioritized your time with me. At least, I'm not going to speak for my sisters, but I feel like you prioritized your time with me. But it may have been one of those things that we'll explore later on, where as a parent myself now, I know how taking care of a kid and trying to meet a kid's needs can cause me to neglect my spouse. So having a 9-year-old, I might prioritize that 9-year-old because he's 9, but I'm taking from my wife, in order to do it. Dad, how conflicted did you feel? I mean, I doubt very seriously that you were like, yeah, I'd much rather go to these calling hours than be at home with my family. I feel like you wanted to be with mom and with us kids, but that you also cared about people, and you also felt like, well, this is what Jesus would do, right? So tell us how much conflict you felt within yourself when you had your wife and your kids that wanted to go to the fair with you, and then you had somebody you cared about who had some emergency and they were calling you for help.
What I was trying to do is do both, and sometimes I felt like I was between a rock and a hard place. But your mom would give in. She said, "You got 30 minutes to get this done. We'll be waiting for you. If you're not back, we'll go ahead and start without you." And so I knew in my heart what was really important. What was really important was my family. That should be priority one. But I also knew, the thing about it, I had been in Ashland for 10, 15, 20 years. The brethren become your friends. You get very close to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're like family as well. And so when someone dies in their family, they're like dying in your family. You feel like, at least I got to go over there and show up.
Mm.
And sometimes, usually when a person died, I went to the home of the person who died. Mm-hmm. So I was there for that. But I tried to be there for the calling hours as well as do the funeral. Maybe, generally speaking, the next day is what they did back in the day. But I felt very conflicted. Yeah, I didn't want anybody to think that I didn't care. And maybe that was wrong to feel that way. Mm-hmm. And but it did work out. Your mother and I are still together after almost 49 years of marriage, and I don't think you children are damaged too much. But any preacher listening to this, or anybody listening, can see where that conflict could be. The problem really arose whenever someone wanted all my time on Tuesday night. Mm. I couldn't do that. I just couldn't do that, except for my family. So, and our leadership understood my schedule, and so they worked around that too. So, mm-hmm. that's the only time I really had a problem, when there's someone always died the wrong day of the week.
Yeah, we made the joke a couple of episodes ago, I think, about every time we went on vacation, someone died.
Yeah.
which is actually a fact. Every time we went on vacation, someone died.
It died before we
And-
left, or right while we were going.
Right, exactly. And I said something a couple weeks ago, I think, on this podcast about every time we announced that we were going on vacation, the church should have gone on high alert, because they would know somebody here is about to die because the Irwins are going out of town.
Who will die this time? The Irwins are leaving again.
Put pressure on the elders to not let you go on vacation anymore. How many people, I think most of the help that you did, and you can correct me if I'm off base on this, but a lot of the help that I remember you giving people was going to sit with them in the waiting room while someone was having surgery, or visiting them in the hospital. Counseling people who were having a family crisis. I remember one time, you took me with you to change someone's tire. And there's a story behind that we'll get to in a minute. So I feel like one of the greatest blessings that you gave people, maybe the greatest blessing, was just your presence and your time. Right. But then there were people that came along and they had bigger problems than, changing a tire, or, heart surgery or something like that. And I'm just wondering how many of those people can you remember coming along that, they needed help of a nature that would require a greater investment of your energy and time over a longer period of time? And how did you handle those?
Well, we had quite a few, and I did not know how to handle them. And but I would ask around, ask other preachers how to handle it, and I learned some things. And of course, those people needed to be referred on to the professionals. But that did happen quite a bit, and those caused some real issues, not just for me, but also for our family, but also for the church family. Mm-hmm. It got so bad. Those are, I call them bizarre situations, or short extreme situations. But yeah, I finally learned how to say no. I can't help you. Get somebody else to help you.
You finally learned how to say that.
Yeah.
Meaning you didn't.
I didn't what?
Meaning you didn't say that at first. You had to learn how to say that.
Yeah.
Mom is shaking her head.
A lot of preachers, I was going to say every preacher, but that's not true. Some preachers, maybe even a few preachers, have kind of a messianic complex, and that is they feel like they need to fix everything and fix everybody. And I learned in my mid 40s, in my early 50s, I can't do that. There were people that Jesus couldn't fix. He could heal them, but he couldn't fix them unless they cooperated, of course. There's some people that I couldn't fix because they wouldn't cooperate, or it was beyond my ability to do so. And I've learned the hard way. That's the case. There was a time whenever I had to find another place to do my work, and I had an office in the basement of a furniture store in downtown.
Really?
So I get my work done. People were always coming by the office, and they'd come in and plop themselves down and just sit there and talk for hours.
Yeah.
I was trying to get the work done. So I had an office at the house. I had an office at the church building, but I had to get a third office downtown. And
I did not know that.
Nobody ever found me there. What's that?
Yeah, I didn't know that until just now. I remember when you set up your office at home, and I wanted to know why. And you told me it's because I can't get anything done at the church office because people just show up. And so now you're telling me that once people figured out you weren't at the church office, they started showing up at our house. So that you
I
had
think
to,
they may have.
so
Yeah,
that
but
you had to
they
go,
need to call there for sure.
yeah, you had to go hide out in an undisclosed location
Yep,
Mhm.
that's right.
to get any, Bible study and prayer and, preparation work done for
And
your.
he got that idea from another preacher who had done the same thing.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Bruce
Okay.
McClarty.
Yeah.
Bruce had an office at a funeral home near the crematorium. That thinned out the people real quick.
Yeah.
But
So,
yes,
Mom, you shook your head super hard a minute ago when I asked Dad about trying to help people that couldn't be helped, or trying to help people that Dad couldn't actually help. And I asked Dad, did you had to learn that over time, or did you know how to do that at first? And that's when you shook your head really hard. Why did you shake your head so hard there? What are you thinking about?
Well, once again, not only your dad's compassionate heart, but his real sense of duty and responsibility to the position of being a minister. He just felt like he couldn't say no to people. And he just felt like that he had to keep trying to help them. I truly believe that he thought if he worked with somebody long enough that he would be able to help them.
Yeah.
And it took him a long time to figure out that some people, they may say they want help, but they don't really want the kind of help that they need. And so it took him a long time to figure out there are just some people I can't help. I mean, years, we're talking years.
And you seem to have some strong emotions or some strong feelings about that, Mom. I mean, is this the kind of thing that Dad didn't see, but you could see it?
Absolutely.
Did you fight about it?
And it's really funny because, for a long time, I would say to your dad, you're too soft-hearted. And his response to me was always, you're too hard-hearted. And yes, maybe I am, but I don't get as emotionally involved with people as he does or did. And so his emotions would be all stirred up, his soft-heartedness. And he really wanted to help them. And I would be saying, you cannot see this. You're not seeing this because you're too emotionally involved.
Yeah.
We had a lot of discussions about a lot of people over the years about that,
Yeah.
But I was the hard-hearted one and he was not.
There was this time I mentioned a minute ago where I was playing in the backyard when I was about 8 or 9 years old, about Daniel's age. And it was a summer evening, and Dad came out on the back porch and said, "Hey, I need you to come with me. I got to go change a tire for this woman." And Daniel, I was the same way. I'm like, I don't want to go. I'm playing, man, and Dad said, "No, I need you to come with me, help me change this tire." I'm like, "Dad, I don't know how to change a tire. I don't want to go." And you forced me to go with you to this woman's house to look at her tire. And I remember we went into her garage where her car was parked, and you looked at the tire, and the tire wasn't flat. And so we just kind of looked at the car for a couple minutes, and she stood in her doorway, and you said, "Yeah, your tire's fine." And we left. And I was really angry because I'd been, playing in the backyard, and you made me ride across town to fix this tire that wasn't flat. And I was like, "Dad, what is that all about, man?" And you said, and then you told me the story about the time that Papa went to help a woman, and she answered the door in the nude. And you said that in as a ministers sometimes get into situations where they go to help somebody, and that person seduces them, right? They're looking for a different kind of help, right? So I'm, there's some danger here in helping people. And I think for ministers, male ministers in particular, especially male ministers who like to feel like they're heroes, right? You talked about having a Messiah complex. I mean, there's something about men that we want to save the day. We like to be knights in shining armor. We like to be heroes. How many minister friends of yours have you known that have gotten into trouble by trying to help somebody, have gotten entangled in some way?
Quite a few.
More than we'd like to say.
Yeah, more than we'd like to say. Several.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How often did you feel like in helping somebody, you were in a situation that was, I mean, in that situation, you had the foresight to take your 9-year-old son with you. But, how many times in your career did you go to help somebody and you thought, this is a bad situation, or I shouldn't be here, or I think something else is going on here. I need to get out.
I had to weigh each situation on its own merit. If I knew, if I went to a single mother's house, if there were children there, I felt halfway safe. But some situations I just would not go to. There were some situations where I trusted the woman explicitly. And I was fortunate enough, nothing ever happened.
Mm-hmm.
I always made sure there was another woman with me or another person, maybe your mother, somebody, just to make sure. And when I was in college being trained, Brother Baxter always warned us young men about women. God's women are wonderful ladies, don't misunderstand. I'm talking about the women who have ulterior motives. And so I always had that stuck in the back of my mind. And there were times when I had somebody else with me, usually another woman, and I was thankful I did take someone else with me.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the potential situations were just prevented because I used my brain instead of my emotions. And did I take some chances? Yeah, I did. Not a lot, but enough. And the Lord looked after me, took care of me, and nothing happened. Nothing would have happened, so far as I'm concerned. It wouldn't have happened, but I'm very fortunate. I did not want to do anything that would question my reputation or question my wife's reputation or hurt you children. And that's kind of the reasons why I was very careful.
Yeah.
I knew it would hurt the church too if something did happen.
Well, and it also could be that even though nothing happened,
people talk.
The other person could
Right.
say something happened,
Right.
and it could ruin your reputation.
And
So you just got to be so careful.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever see him taking chances, Mom, that you warned him about taking?
He was pretty good about that. Now I can remember when we lived in Akron, there was a lady who came to the church. She had 3 children. She was married, but her husband was not a member. So she was a Sunday morning widow. Okay. Came with her 3 children. And I felt like she took a real shine to your dad. And she got to where she called him a lot about a lot of things. And I said to him, I think she likes you. And he said, no, she doesn't. No, she doesn't. She doesn't. She's not, it's not. And I said, I'm not accusing you of anything, but I'm just telling you, my gut feeling is that she likes you more than she should, and he was very careful after that. And nothing never happened. I can't remember if she backed off or not, but your dad, he just didn't see it. Sometimes a woman can see things about another woman that a man can't see.
Yeah.
A lot of the problem I had is that I had a lot of naivety. I was very naive. I was very protected as a child. I didn't see a lot of the things that I did see in the ministry, and also wanted to help people, and I always put myself second or third, and I paid sometimes people that do that pay a high price, and I paid a high price. I didn't destroy my family. I didn't destroy the church, but I did. It hurt me later on.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll talk about it. And what I mean by that is burnout.
Yeah.
So I don't leave the wrong impression. It was something else.
Well, last week, Dad, we talked about the building campaign in Ashland, and the main question in that conversation was, how did raising money and mobilizing the congregation to buy property and build a new campus, how did that affect your quote unquote regular work as the minister? So evangelism, Bible study, teaching, preaching, and then all of the things that you did to help out people who were in need. And we talked about whether that building campaign was a factor in your eventual burnout and having to quit the ministry just before the congregation was ready to start building its new facility. But there was another series of events that happened during that time in our lives. I think I have the timing correct on this, but there was a member of the church who we will call Joe. There was a member of the church, we'll call him Joe. His name is not Joe, everybody, but that's the pseudonym we're picking for him. That my recollection is he was having some problems. I think he had maybe alcoholic. He had some substance abuse issues, and had some issues in his marriage. I think he was divorced. Maybe I'm kind of really don't know the details, because I think I was away from home at this point. I don't think I was living at home anymore. But Dad, you helped this member, and you helped him repeatedly over what I think was several years. It seems to me like this went for several years, but as time passed, from a distance, it seems like things started to spiral out of control and get worse. So there are a lot of details I don't have in this story, and I wonder if you can just take us through the timeline of helping this particular member of the church, how it started, how the situation developed, and then where it led.
This young man came by the church office one morning, and he was young. He introduced himself, and he just said he wanted to study the Bible. That was kind of the long and short of it. As time went along, I found out that his wife had left him. In fact, I think they did get a divorce, and that's because he was a raging alcoholic. And he was struggling because she had left him. And but anyway, I studied with him and gave him some material, and he studied it. He was very, very faithful in studying all the material, the biblical material, and filling it out and going over it with me. And our relationship didn't last years; it did last months, though. But after a while, he did become what we call codependent. And codependency is usually a part of the behavior of an alcoholic. They become their whole world depends on other people, and their significance and their value becomes dependent upon other people, and they just need constant. They're emotionally damaged or underdeveloped, and so as time went along, this guy demanded more and more of my time and called all the time, came by all the time, and after a while, the relationship became abusive towards me. And it not only became abusive towards me, it became abusive towards others in the church. This man was calling people. He had a church directory because he was a member. We baptized him because he studied the Bible and he wanted to be baptized. Well, you can't refuse that. So when he became a member, he got a church directory, just like anybody else would get a church directory. And he started calling people. And I think he called the women. So he called. Does that sound right to you? He called the women.
A threat to the women.
He was a threat to the women. And so that really got out of hand. And he was arrested. He went to jail for a while, got out, did it again, went back to jail again. He threatened certain members.
He was stalking.
He was stalking members. He would sit outside of their homes. This was just really getting weird and bizarre and dangerous. And he was schizophrenic, paranoid, which means he had at least more than one personality. And he was paranoid in the sense that he felt someone was always out to get him. So you put those two together, it's pretty bad. At the very beginning, he seemed like a normal person, but after a while, he just got crazy. He got really bad crazy, and that has started affecting me. It started affecting your mother's and my relationship, and it affected the whole cotton picking congregation. It was just getting out of hand. He got out.
Was this in the 90s, late 90s? I want to make sure I have the timing right here. I'm sure that I was in college.
You were in college. It started not long, about the time you went away to college is when it started.
Yeah. And Dad, you said months, but I remember this stretching. I remember when he was baptized. I remember when he joined the church, and I remember that early on you were spending some time with him because he needed the help. And then from afar, I was away at college, I started to hear more and more stories about things that he would do. And so my perception is that this took place over, at least a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. I mean, it got worse and worse. And then there was a period where I feel like this guy was living rent free in our collective, mind as a family. Mom, I remember you and Dad fighting about this guy. I actually remember fights that you had. I remember us as a family, maybe on vacation or spending time together, and this guy's name would come up in our conversations. And I remember you having some very strong opinions, Mom, and Dad not really agreeing with you. So tell us what you saw happening from your point of view.
Well, it did start like your dad said, and he was very polite. He was very faithful in his attendance to the church. But he started calling your dad more and more. And I'm talking 20, 25, 30 times a day.
Whoa.
Even at home, at our house. And we would be sitting down to dinner, and he would call, and he was starting to get verbally abusive with your dad, and calling him names and talking about how he wasn't a Christian, that your dad wasn't a Christian. And this was at the time when you didn't have caller ID or anything. So if the phone rang, you answered it. Well, it got to the point with us that we did not let your dad answer the phone at our house anymore, because it would be this guy. And he would tie your dad up on the phone for hours. And we wouldn't let, I wouldn't let Michelle or Bethy answer the phone either. I would answer the phone. And I can remember one evening, we sat down for dinner and the phone rang. And so I answered it, and it was this guy. And he asked to speak to Trav. And I said, well, we just started our dinner. Can I let him call you back after can he finish his dinner, and then I'll have him call you back? No, I really need to talk to him now. And I said, well, I think you can wait just a few minutes. It won't take long, and then he'll call you back. And he started crying on the phone. I really need to talk to him. I really need to talk to him. Well, by this time, your dad's standing right beside me and he can hear everything that's being said. And he said, well, just let me go ahead and talk to him now. So I handed your dad the phone, and immediately this man's voice changed. He was growling. He was cursing. He was calling your dad every nasty thing you could think of. I mean, it was an evil voice. That convinced me this man had a demon. I mean, it was the scariest thing, how from me having the phone and handing it to your dad, immediately this other personality came out, and it was terrible. And I didn't want your dad to be around him. I didn't want your dad to talk to him, because I knew what it did to your dad to talk to him. And so we did disagree a lot. Well, then he started stalking people. One evening, your dad and Russ Hawthorne went out together to do a Bible study. And the phone rang, and it was Tina, Russ's wife. And she said, so-and-so, Joe, you gave me the pseudonym Joe just called me. And he said he's on the way here to our house. He's coming. I don't know what to do. I'm scared. And I said, throw Lindsay in the car and come over here right now. Get out of your house right now before he gets there, and come over to our house. And so she did. One of our elders' wives, he was stalking her. He sat out in front of her house, and her husband worked late hours, and she was home by herself, and she was afraid. I was terrified. He kept telling me how cute he thought Bethy was. He just thought she was the cutest thing he'd ever seen, and she was still in junior high school. And it was to the point that I just almost didn't want to let her out of my sight. And I can remember one evening going and picking her up from school and stopping at Hawkins on the way home to pick up something. And as she and I came to the front of the store, she saw him. He was up at the checkout, and she said, Mom, there he is. And we just left our groceries and got out of there before he could see us. I mean, that's the point that we had reached. We were just all afraid. And your dad, I kept saying he needs to be arrested. And your dad was like, we can't do that to a member of the church. And I said, but he's got to be stopped. He's got to be stopped. He was calling us all night long. He would call during the night. We would not answer the phone. We had an answering machine. He would leave messages, all these awful messages on the phone. And as soon as he hung up from leaving a message, he'd call again. We talked to the police. They said that we needed to keep a log of all these calls, what time he called, what he said, all that kind of stuff. It was a 24-hour terror is what it was. Mm-hmm. And your dad really struggled. I mean, he really struggled with the fact that we couldn't have another member of the church arrested. But God took care of that for us, because this elder had him arrested. That he was sitting outside their home and scaring his wife. So the elder had him arrested. And your dad didn't have to deal with that.
What were you hoping to do, Dad? What were you hoping was going to happen in this situation? So mom hoped he'd get arrested.
Yeah.
What were you hoping was going to happen?
I was hoping I was just hoping he'd just go away. What it was, I was afraid of the church's reputation. I didn't want this getting into the newspaper, people finding out this guy was a member of our congregation. But the elder who had him arrested had the right idea. But what I learned years later, what I've learned since, is that not only was Joe codependent, so was I. And so there's only one thing worse than one codependent person in a crazy relationship, and that is two. And so that was my problem. And so, but going back to your question, I don't know what I was thinking, but I was getting pretty desperate, and in some sense, I was relieved that he was arrested, that he was in jail.
Mm-hmm.
And what is so strange about that situation? He was in jail, but I went to visit him in jail. I visited all kind of people in jails, and they were members of the church.
Mm-hmm.
Did some pretty horrible things, and that was one of the most horrible things that happened to us.
What he was my recollection is that I got kind of nervous for y'all.
Yeah.
Every time that it seemed that for a period of time, every time that we talked, he came up. And now I can see why, because if he was calling you all night long and leaving messages and stalking people at the church, I was nervous for your safety.
Yeah.
For a period of time there. And I was relieved when he went to jail, because I felt like you and the church were going to be safer with him behind bars. Looking back on that situation now, I mean, what would you have done different?
I probably would have told him, I can't help you. I probably would have conferred with the leadership first. Then we would have gone to him and said, we can't help you. You need to get some help or don't come back. The elders finally did clamp down on him pretty hard. Mm-hmm. And they said, you can't go to church here anymore. Sounds terrible to say that, but that's what they said. And there was another church. He went to another church. He had to apologize to our congregation before he left. And he did that. He actually did that. And he went to the other congregation, and that's the end of that story, so far as we know. But we should have clamped down. We should have done something sooner. But I was the one blocking that. I was trying to handle this thing by myself. And for whatever reason, codependency, whatever.
And that was going on top of 350 members that you were caring for, and people outside the church that you cared for, and the building campaign, and your work as a preacher and teacher, and your marriage and your children. So how much is too much? Now that you have all this perspective, when it comes to helping people, which is what Jesus did, right? If we're Christians and we're following the example of Jesus Christ, then we are going to help people who are in need. But Dad, how do you know when it's too much? How do you know where to draw the line?
When it starts hurting the church, when it starts hurting your family, when it starts hurting you, that's when you got to draw the line. You got to be able to recognize that and be honest with yourself and draw the line. And you also need to have a proper, it all starts with a proper view of yourself. The Bible says, don't think more highly of yourself than you should. It says it twice. It says in Romans 12 and Galatians chapter 6. And I had this, like I said, messianic complex that I had to fix it all. And that's of the devil. That is not of God. That's of the devil. And I've learned that since that time. And I've learned also that it's okay to say no. And it's also to say, I don't know, or I'm not capable, or I'm weak, or I'm a sinner. It's okay to say those things. It's okay to say, I cannot help you. You must go elsewhere. And also, you must go elsewhere or we will have you arrested. We cannot let you harm people. I learned all that the hard way. And I'm sorry to say that the people had to suffer along with me, including your mom and you kids and the local church there. But it happened, and I can't change that now. But even in my writing right now, if you read anything that I write, and I deal with getting people involved in ministry, I tell them about burnout, and I tell them about compassion burnout, and I tell them about learning to say no. Because there are times when it is legitimate to say no.
Mom, what's your answer to the question?
of how do you know when too much is too much?
Yeah. How do you, and that's, yes, that question, or going back, what would you recommend that dad do different?
Well, I agree with his answer. Okay. That when it starts hurting yourself or your family or your relationships, then it's too much. The only thing I would say different is when other people tell you that something's not right, you need to
listen to them.
At least consider what they're saying, listen to them and consider what they're saying. I mean, there were times I felt like a nag, and I never wanted to be a nag, but it needed to be said, but he wouldn't listen, So I would just say, listen to those who care about you.
Let's rehash something real quick here. Last week, Dad, we talked about the building campaign, and you said something about you talked very frankly about the pressure you put on yourself.
Right. And
you were caught in a bind, I think, in that you genuinely loved people. You always have genuinely cared about people deeply, for the right reasons. Like, you're one of those rare people who cares about people, not because of what you can get out of them or how you feel about yourself, but because you want them to do well in life. At the same time, you had this dark side, which was you felt this incredible pressure to perform, and you didn't trust anybody else to do what only you felt you were the only one who could do what you could do, and you wouldn't trust other people. You didn't trust the love that other people had for you. We talked about that with the elders last week. You didn't trust that other people could do what you did, and I think that became your undoing, and the source of your breakdown.
Right.
So it's got to be hard. I'm saying all that to say that in your situation, that's a hard situation, to love people genuinely, but to also have the sinful nature where you put pressure on yourself. You said it yourself today. You have a Messiah complex.
Yeah.
It's got to be me or no one else. So let's finish this up. I want to push back on one thing you said, and then just end with some practical advice for church leaders today. You said, I said, when do you know when it's too much? And you said when it begins to hurt. And I disagree with that.
Okay.
I think if it starts to hurt, you've already gone way beyond where you need to be.
Okay.
So the question is, for church leaders, ministers, elders, people in congregations who are responsible for the care and feeding of people and the health of the congregation, how do we make it so that those people don't get to the point where it hurts? Those people who are caring for others, how do we make it so they don't get to that point where they're starting to redline? What's some practical advice that both of you can give to church leaders and church ministers and church caretakers?
I think the first thing is total honesty. Honesty, being honest with yourself, being honest with other people. And what I mean by that is this: you say in your heart, I do not know what to do. I cannot help you. It's just being honest, knowing your limitations. What it is, when I saw people, some people would state their limitations. I thought they were saying, well, I just don't want to do this. Well, we have limitations. Come on. And let's just admit those limitations. Then I think the second thing we can do is say, let's find someone that can help. And that's the first two things that come to my mind. That's what I should have done. I'm limited. I can't do anything. Let's find some help. let's work together as a team with my late church leadership, and let's find this person some help and get right away and get him some help. That's what I would change. I'm not sure that's what you want to hear, but that's kind of what comes to mind.
No, I want your honest answer.
That's my honest answer.
Yeah. What about you, Mom?
Well, the only thing I would add is several years ago, your dad is good friends with Jerry Barber. And several years ago, Jerry told your dad that he has for years gone to a counselor once a month. For years. And it was because as minister, he really didn't have anybody else he could just open up to about things. And so he has done that as a preventative for his mental health. And when I heard that, I looked at your dad and I said, that's what you need to do. You need to do that. And he was like, I don't have time. We don't have the money. There's not anybody around here that I would trust to talk to. You know, he had every excuse in the book and he wouldn't do it. But I think it's an amazing idea. I think it's a very balancing idea. And that's what I would suggest. I still suggest that, even though your dad still doesn't do it. I would suggest it. He's making faces.
I think that's really good advice, Dad. I see a counselor every other week, and I have for years. And one of the things we didn't talk about today is, I've heard you say through the years that bearing other people's burdens all the time takes a toll. And you told me, I think that, all the time that your father spends with people who are in crisis takes a toll on your dad. And I was thinking during this conversation today, where was Dad going to lay those burdens down? And it sounds like as the years went by, he just piled more and more and more on himself.
That's true.
And probably, Dad, piled more on yourself than Jesus was willing to pile on himself, because Jesus knew how to take a break and get away from people and go spend time in prayer.
And say no.
And say no. So, well, thank you for digging up some unpleasant memories and talking about the hard lessons that you learned by helping people, how it affected your relationship, how it affected the church. And again, there's gold. There's gold and there's wisdom in the mistakes that you made in the past. And Dad, we know that you love people very much, and that's why you try so hard, and that's why you do what you do. So anything else you want to say here at the end? Anything we left out?
Keep the focus of your life, Jesus Christ. He's your strength. He's your rest. He's your peace. He's your hope. He's your everything. And if you take your focus off of him, you're going to get in trouble. And that's what happened to me. I don't want anybody else to go through that.
Amen. Well, I'm going to let you all go now because you're on your way to the Athens Church of Christ in Athens, Tennessee this weekend, right? Because Dad is doing a book signing.
That's correct.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So check out that book if you haven't looked at it yet. It'll be in the show notes. Again, you can click on it and buy a copy of Dad's book and buy a few copies and send them around to your family and friends for Christmas. My brother-in-law is about to become a minister at his church in January, and Dad, I'm going to ask you for an autographed copy of your book so I can give that to him. But have a good time in Athens this weekend
Thank you.
with your friends there and signing books, and we'll catch up with you all next time.
Okay.
Thanks.
Been good.
Thank you again for being part of the Minister in the Making podcast. Mom will be back with us next time, and she and Dad will talk about how life and ministry affected their marriage. You might remember that Mom grew up dreaming of becoming a preacher's wife, and that dream came true when she married Dad. Over the first 20 years of their marriage, Mom found out that sharing life with a minister is not always what she imagined it would be. But by the late 1990s and early 2000s, Dad's choices and habits as a minister strained his and Mom's marriage almost to the breaking point. The next episode is all about ministers and their marriages, and I hope you'll listen. Now, if you want me to ask Dad or Mom a specific question in a future episode, please email it to me at bt@btirwin.com. That's B as in Bradley, T as in Travis, at btirwin.com. And don't forget to check out Dad's new book, We Are God's Masterpiece, at amazon.com. You'll find a link to that in the show notes. You'll also find a link to Dad's Caring Bridge webpage, where you can keep up with his cancer treatments. I want to thank you again for being part of the Minister in the Making podcast. I hope that listening to these conversations with Dad and Mom is well worth your time. If you're getting inspiration or wisdom from these podcasts, please share them with an elder, a fellow church member, or a minister. And also, don't forget to leave a good review on whatever podcast service you use. Until next time, grace and peace.